How can I help?
Yeah, I just want to start off saying thank you so much for this session too. I found I expect it to be really helpful. I think just for some context, I have a diagnostic of 137, which I took back in early January, and I
Okay.
want to apply for this upcoming cycle, which I know is a little ambitious, and I want to go straight through as a KJD.
Mm.
But at the moment, I've studied for 2+ months, and I'm just trying to break out of the 150s right now. I was wondering if you had any tips on that.
Yeah. So you said cold diagnostic of 137 and now you're at 150.
Hmm.
Well, that's great, right? 13 points of progress. How long has it been since you started studying?
I think I really consistently started towards the end of February,
Okay.
um, like 2-ish months.
So 2 months. I mean, that's solid progress. Wonderful. And when are you planning on taking the exam?
So at the moment, I don't have any official signups, but I was thinking August. If not, I could definitely do September, October. I don't know if that's pushing it. I also wanted to gauge your advice on that. What's the furthest out LSAT I could take if I want to apply for this upcoming cycle?
Yeah. Why don't we do that first and then we'll talk about some LR advice.
Yeah. Mhm.
So, the big bad, what is it? Wolf of when you should apply. This is like
Mhm.
a notoriously contested issue in the LSAT community. People are very divided. In my opinion, okay, I don't think this should be as divisive of an issue. And you can just look at the data. So last cycle, I'm not sure. Did you pay any attention to like how this like current cycle went?
Not too much, but I know it was one of the most competitive ones.
Yep. Yes, it was. And it was also one of the slowest. So
Yeah.
what does that mean? Well, people send in applications when it opens, August, October, and they hear back in March. What value did applying early get you? Not much, right? The problem with applying early in the idea is that there are two benefits people talk about. One, you get a better chance of getting accepted because the applicant pool, is smaller. And two, more scholarships. To the first point, the applicant pool has only basically increased, and law school admission officers know this. So what do? They delay. They hold up the cycle. They hold decisions because they know that a ton more people are coming in. And so if you apply super early, the idea that you're going to get a decision back early isn't really true. And so that benefit doesn't really exist. And two, the idea that there are more scholarships, unless you are applying, and this gets into like maybe hard limits, super late, like February, March. Have I ever seen
Mhm.
students get responses back from admissions saying like, maybe try apply next year? Our scholarships are kind of used. Although that's kind of an excuse they use to not give you money. You can always push back on that. So I would say the idea that you need to apply early was pushed by a certain group of people. And I don't think that the data supports it anymore. There are a lot of reputable sources. Spivey is one of them that has kind of consistently agreed with this point. Is that there is no real benefit to applying super early. Now, you know what is a good timeline? People say by Thanksgiving. That's fair. Honestly, at this point, I think you can push it even further. With how slow cycles are going, if the you know if you apply in January, I think that could still be okay. Now, what's more important than applying early is getting the highest LSAT score. So if you
Mhm.
applying in Thanksgiving means that if you applied in a couple months, you would have increased your score by 5 points, you probably should have waited. Like the value difference of having 5 more points in the LSAT, even a few more points in the LSAT is huge in scholarships, right? Because typically 1 point on the LSAT is like $10,000 in scholarships. And
Right.
if it hits you into a new median bracket, right, the difference between 50th percentile and 75th percentile is massive. So if you waiting a few months to get a higher LSAT score as possible, it's almost always a better decision, unless again we're talking like super late February. Is probably when I'd start saying like I'd consider next cycle.
Mhm.
Although, as cycles go, if it continues along this trend of it getting, you know, longer and slower, that might not be the case.
Gotcha.
Um, and so I would say for you personally, September, October, totally fine. I took both those exams. Um, and I don't think there's a problem with it. I don't think anyone would disagree with that point as well. And it just gives you more time to prepare, and more time is better. I always say schedule for the exam when you're seeing practice test or section test scores that match up with where you want to score. And so if that takes you to October, it takes you to October. Don't rush it. Don't just take the test because you feel like you should. Take it when you're ready.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think it was definitely perpetuated by like certain people and like I don't know, I think I fell into it. But I guess with that I also wanted to like ask like currently at my point of studying, I haven't really been taking practice tests just because I like don't really want to burn through the questions. And I guess I wanted to gauge your response on that. Like, do you think I should continue with just like really drilling and like practice time tests, not practice time sections, as opposed to like taking a full length test to see where I'm at?
Absolutely. I'd say the process you're doing right now is great. Don't feel like you need to do practice tests. And the reason is this. Okay, and there's actually a couple reasons. So the idea of taking a bunch of practice tests is normally to improve your stamina, right? Or to improve, I don't know, generally like how you are at the test. The stamina point just doesn't exist, right? People, I think, like to treat the LSAT, and I use this language too, like a marathon. But what's important is it's not actually a marathon, right? The way you get better at a marathon is running. The way you get better at
Right.
the LSAT is not just doing questions. Now, do you want to treat it like it's a journey and it takes time? Absolutely. But we don't improve at the LSAT by doing questions. We improve at the LSAT by reviewing our mistakes, learning from our questions. It's never quantity, it's always quality. And so the nice value of a practice section, which I highly recommend, test sections, timed LR sections, timed RC sections, is that they're shorter and you can review immediately after. And,
Mhm.
correct me if I'm wrong, have you taken practice tests before? I know you're not doing it right now, but in the past.
Only my diagnostic.
Oh, great. And did you happen to review after you did the diagnostic?
Not really. I think it was really sloppy. So,
Well,
yeah, I'm trying to put more of an emphasis on reviewing too.
one of the reasons you may not have done the review is because you just did a 2.5 hour exam, right? And
Mhm.
so a review process of that could take hours. And so if you want to be motivated to not just take the exam but then review 2 hours after, good luck. Right? I could never do that. I would always tell myself, I'd be like, Daniel, I don't care if it kills you. You're gonna finish this test and then you're gonna review. And I never
Right.
did. Because mentally you're gone. Right. And so when we
Mhm.
talk about quality over quantity, how are you ever going to be effective at reviewing if you're exhausted? But a time section, 35 minutes or higher if you have accommodations, I could review after that, right?
Mhm.
And what's really important about reviewing is that you do it immediately after you take the section or do the questions or do the drills. Because when you review later on in the afternoon, right? Some people like this idea. It kind of has like some validity sense, like if you think about it, which is that, oh, like, if I review after, then my brain won't be like so hyper focused on it. It'll be fresh. But you actually don't
Mhm.
really want that. You want to be able to remember exactly what you were thinking when you were doing those questions. So I call it meta thinking. Like that's how I teach it to my students. But I say, you want to be thinking about how you were thinking. And this kind of gets into like general LR advice, which I know you wanted to talk about too. So it's a good transition. But one of the most important things for improvement is not just, again, doing questions, but what were you thinking? Like literally what was going on in your head when you were doing that question? Um, what were you thinking when you read that stimulus? What were you thinking when you picked this answer choice? What were you thinking when you eliminated the right answer choice? Knowing what you were thinking allows you to change that process. I think that a lot of students review like this. The answer choice was B that they selected, the correct answer was C. I picked B because I misread the stimulus. C is the correct answer. I mean, some people, hopefully, they're not saying because it's the right answer, but like some version of because it better weakens the argument. I mean,
Yeah.
unfortunately, that process is entirely useless. You were better off just not reviewing at all. But if you're thinking about what you're thinking, well, then when you go to B, which in this hypothetical is the wrong answer that you selected, you go, well, when I read B, I actually interpret it to mean this, right? But now I see when I go to the stimulus, my thinking was incorrect because when I read the stimulus, I was thinking this, but it's really this. Now that you're seeing your thought process, you're like, well, now how can I change that? Right? So when you're reviewing, instead of just thinking again, level one is why is it right? Why is it wrong? Everybody does that. But level 2 is what was I doing that made that happen? And then level 3, like the highest level of reviewing, where you actually learn, is what am I going to do differently next time? So if you always focus on that process on LR, you're going to improve. And the nice thing, again, we were talking about time sections. It's a lot more realistic that you're going to be able to effectively do that because you'll remember everything. You can remember question 10 out of 25. It's pretty hard to remember question 10 out of 100. So I definitely
Mm-hmm.
recommend that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, I feel like sometimes I definitely just like go through a review and like half-ass it if in
Mm.
like a certain way. But yeah, that definitely helps. And I think there's this point that I wanted to bring up. It's just like sometimes I'll read a stimulus and just genuinely retain nothing.
Mm.
I think is there any like solution for that or like how to go about that?
So much. So much.
Okay.
I think that, like, first of all, that, from time to time, that's just going to happen. But it's
Mhm.
how do we improve what we call, so at LSAT Defenders, like we talk about your approach. We talk about how do you build an approach that consistently you can use on every question, regardless of difficulty, so that you know what you're doing and so that that situation doesn't happen. And so my recommendation for you is, of course, to really focus and hone in on what is my process to break down a stimulus. Do you have one? Um, and making sure that that process is consistent. Obviously, like, we do classes on this, and like we have, all our tutors are trained in this. But the basics of it is that you want to be able to read a stimulus in a way that makes sense to you. So I call it painting the picture. The idea being that you want to read each sentence, and each sentence is like a new brushstroke adding to the picture. If you don't understand one sentence, don't move on to the second. If you don't understand the second and the first, don't move on to the third. And so slowing down, breaking it up even into words, breaking it up into phrases, even, can be super helpful. Another thing I highly recommend for students is to use your own examples. So typically the most confusing stimuli, right, like a science about
Mhm.
biochemistry, it's about some random molecules. Who cares? Don't use their language, use language that makes sense to you. So all the
Mhm.
time in class, right, I'll go over things like McDonald's, Pizza Hut, sports, like stuff that makes sense to you, and substitute the language. Like, don't force yourself to play their game. And if something doesn't make sense, it's not going to make sense if you read it 10 more times, if it's just conceptually confusing. So make the concepts thing that makes sense to you. And the nice thing about that is when you start doing that consistently, you get better at it, right? And so that's about developing your approach that you're able to read stimulus in a way, or stimuli in a way, that you're able to effectively break it down, use your own examples, use your own numbers, and it makes sense to you. Obviously, there are thousands of more strategies that go into that, but the very
Mhm.
basic level, I would say, is just focus on understanding. Go slower,
Got
right? Just focus on my job is to make this one sentence make 100% sense to me that I could repeat it back to someone else in my own words. I think that's another helpful strategy too.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I'll definitely like implement that too. These are all so helpful. And I don't want to take up too much of your time too. I understand you're like there's multiple, but thank you so much again. Like super helpful. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, and it was great meeting you, Nikki. I think that all of
Hmm.
these questions are super normal. And like for someone who's just started 2 months ago, these are all the right questions to be asking. And you're making great progress. And you also have a solid goal and a solid timeline. Like I think you're in a really great position. Definitely try to implement these strategies. Of course, like we offer a ton of stuff at LSAT Defenders. We'd love to help you with our group
Hmm.
coaching, go over concepts like this and our tutoring and stuff like that. But have a great rest of your week and good luck on your studies, okay?
Of course. Thank you so much. Have a
All right.
good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye bye.